In the last section, we installed Helm, and then we eventually said, hey, wait, we need to do some additional setup because we're running everything on Google Cloud. So this little note inside the Helm documentation says that Google Cloud Kubernetes enables something called RBAC by default. So in this section, I want to have a quick discussion on exactly what RBAC is and why it's going to make us have to change the way in which we set up all this Helm and Tiller stuff. So we're going to look at a couple of different diagrams here. Now, I know by this point in the course, you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, let's just deploy this thing and be done with it. And so I'm sure the fact that I threw Helm in here at the very end is probably making you think, oh my gosh, like why more stuff? But trust me, we're almost at the end. We just have a couple more commands to run, and then we'll be able to deploy everything and we'll be good to go. So almost at the end. All right, so a couple diagrams. Now, first thing I want to remind you, because it's going to be really important as we go through this, we just installed Helm. Helm is a reference specifically to the Helm client, which is like a CLI, something that you and I are going to issue commands to. Helm, in turn, is going to take those commands and relay them off to Tiller. Tiller is a pod that is going to be running inside of our cluster, and this pod running Tiller is going to attempt to make changes to the configuration of our cluster. In other words, it's going to try to install new sets of configuration, new sets of deployments, new secrets, whatever else it might be. All right, so with that in mind, I now want to tell you a little bit more about RBAC. So RBAC stands for Role-Based Access Control. The purpose of RBAC is to limit who can access what different types of resources inside of a Kubernetes cluster. Inside of our local development environment of Minikube, the RBAC system was not enabled by default. So in our local environment, essentially you and I, or any pod, could access the cluster directly and arbitrarily change configuration. In other words, we could create a pod inside of our cluster locally, the local cluster, that tried to access the Kubernetes cluster and arbitrarily create new sets of pods or new deployments or new secrets, or delete stuff if it wanted to. Now, as you might imagine, in a production environment, we generally like to kind of lock things down and make sure that unauthorized users or programs do not have the ability to change the configuration of our cluster. So the RBAC system is all about making sure that we have the ability to limit who can do what inside of our cluster. Now, like I said, locally with Minikube, RBAC is not enabled. Google Cloud enables RBAC by default. So in production, we have to deal with this security system. Now, the obvious thing that I want to point out here is that, as I just said, the purpose of Tiller is to attempt